Hi, everybody. We're talking today about coaching leadership styles. And we've talked about autocratic leadership, and the phrase that fits that is my way or the highway. We've talked about dictatorial leadership, where people have input, but the head coach makes the final decision. We've talked about democratic leadership, where everybody has an equal voice. And the last one, of the last frame, is what's known as laissez faire. And laissez faire is a French term which means do as you will or as you go. He is very, I don't care what you do, I'm very laissez faire about what he does. It's however you want to choose to go. There's lots of free opportunity to express yourself and to communicate and to follow or choose not to follow. And so when we look at a laissez-faire coach and we look at that leader, they allow for individual activity and experimentation. A great example of that would be, let's say you were trying to learn how to hit a golf ball, and rather than give you a lot of instruction at first, they give you a bag of balls and they give you a couple of clubs and they put you out on the driving range and say, try to hit it, and they just let you go and experiment. And they teach you basically maybe how to hold the club, and then after that you're just going to go hit it for a while, and they're going to be very laissez-faire. They're going to allow you to do as you will. Some athletes will be very technical and they'll figure out where they're holding the club and how they're swinging the club and how the club face is hitting the ball, etc., etc. Others won't be paying attention to that at all. They're only going to try to hit the ball in their own manner as hard as they can or whatever. A laissez-faire coach would allow you to go and do that. That would be a great time for exploratory learning. There is a lot of good things that comes out of a laissez-faire coach. There's a lot of coaches that would say they don't win much, but that's not true. They do win if they're surrounded by the right kind of people. But again, they are not a goal-oriented coach. They are a process-oriented coach. We didn't put that up on the board here because we were running out of room, but they too are process-oriented. So when we look back, they often sit back to observe, and oftentimes when they're observing, they observe one individual. They don't necessarily watch the whole group. They might, if you had a soccer team, they might sit back and let the ball be kicked around for 15 or 20 minutes. And in that 15 or 20 minutes, the coach only watches one or two or three players. And they might be able to see the way he kicks it or the way she approaches the ball or something that needs to be fixed. Rather than watch the whole group and not give individuals as much attention, laissez-faire people tend to give individuals a lot of attention, and they maybe let the group find their own way. And so you find that they sit back and they watch and observe. And if a person seeks to express themselves, they allow it. They actually even encourage it. A great example of a laissez-faire group might be that not everybody shows up in the same socks, or not everybody shows up in the same, you know, underlayment gear, that kind of thing. As long as the rules would allow it, they would be allowed to do their own thing. Or you've seen teams, this isn't so much anymore, but in the older days, used to have all teams would have all the same haircuts. They couldn't have their hair longer than a certain level, or they couldn't wear it in a certain style or whatever. They all looked the same. That would not be what a laissez-faire person does at all. A laissez-faire person would hold strong to the fact that everybody can be their own individual. They can wear their own clothes. They can do their own thing. And there's some strength in that. There's some real strength in that, because people who have lots of great ideas have lots of opportunity to express those ideas. Perhaps someone is pretty talented in what they do. They have opportunity to express and show that. So a laissez-faire coach would go about things way differently, back extreme opposite of how an autocratic coach would go through. Next one here is they have minimally defined expectations. And they don't, they even have the group. Oftentimes they'll have the group and say, what do we want to accomplish here? What are we trying to do? What is it that we want out of this experience? And the group would tell them. They would decide together. They'd say, well, we want to be able to X, Y, and Z. A great example is I have a really good friend who plays City League soccer over in Yakima. And she has a group. She had to try 3 or 4 groups until she found the group that she liked. When she first started, she started with a coach. They had a coach and they were very, successful, and they wore all the same stuff. They had to buy the same gear. They had to wear the same shoes. Very, very competitive for a women's team that's over 40. Really hard charging. Practices were a certain time. You're expected to be there And they won a lot because the autocratic nature of that, but she found she didn't enjoy it so much. So the next year she joined a different club, and that club was exactly the opposite. It was a very laissez-faire group. They decided when they were going to practice. Some weeks they only practiced once instead of 2 or 3 times. The practice could be short or long. Things varied all the time. So it was funny because Connie had one experience one year and the opposite experience the next year. And what she ended up doing is finding that the two extremes didn't seem to fit her very well at this point in time in her life. And she ended up more in the middle. She joined a third club, and that third club kind of did things a little more to what she was wanting and looking for. It was kind of a dictatorial democratic association. Players got to decide a lot. They decided when they were going to show up, but then coach ran practice like a regular practice. So great example there. One thing that a laissez-faire, one thing that a laissez-faire coach will allow oftentimes is they'll allow for formation of groups. In other words, you can have if I was thinking of say a football team, I would have a whole group of maybe the offensive linemen or the defensive linemen or the running backs or whatever. Those groups would be encouraged. In Connie's experience, she was sharing with me that there was basically 3 groups to her women's soccer team in this laissez-faire group. And of the 3 groups, she didn't really seem to fit in with any of them because they were all friends for a long, long time. Some of them had even played high school soccer together. So the good thing about groups is that you can be with your friends and you can connect with your friends and you can do a lot of things that you all enjoy in that group. The disadvantage is if that little group doesn't blend well with the other group as much. And so Connie, being from the outside, felt like that was part of what was going on. Not that it was bad, just that it wasn't what she was looking for. And so I say nothing is uniform. Nothing uniform is often normal. Hairstyles not the same, uniforms aren't the same. And of course, in City League, oftentimes what happens is to keep the cost down, a City League might have a rule that only the top has to be the same. They don't have to have the same shorts and the same shoes and all those other colors that, say, maybe a collegiate program would have. That has to be the same. In other words, the top and the bottoms have to match. They all have to match with each other. The shoes have to match. Whatever the rules are that they put in place, maybe they just do one thing. I know when I was a little kid playing Little League Baseball, we got a T-shirt. And that T-shirt was the same T-shirt that everybody got on the team, and you were to wear that T-shirt to the game. But what kind of pants you bought, what kind of spikes you had, and all that sort of thing, that was all left up to the parents because of the cost. So there's an example of saying that nothing is uniform. Now, one other thing I might like to note is if you were to go watch a laissez-faire coach in a group, you might not even be able to tell who the leader is. Their behavior, their mannerisms, for as much as, say, we talked about the autocratic leader, you would know very definitely who was in charge. You might not know that in a laissez-faire leadership circle because that person might be weaving their way in and out and around people and being very calm and very quiet. And if you didn't really notice and really started paying attention, you might not even know who was in charge. That's a big, dramatic difference than, say, an autocratic coach. So a laissez-faire coach is really the phrase that we'd like you to remember is you go ahead and do as you please. It's whatever works. Whatever works, that's okay by us because we want you to be a part and be happy and et cetera, et cetera. So we've had 4 leadership styles: autocratic, which is very goal-oriented, or not process-oriented, but goal-oriented; dictatorial, very goal-oriented; democratic, very process-oriented; and laissez-faire, very process-oriented. At the end of a laissez-faire coach, they might say, did we have fun this weekend? Did we have a good time? They don't even ask about, they're not talking about the wins and losses. Maybe they went to some town and played in a softball tournament all weekend and they had a chance to be in another town with some other friends and they were camping and they're doing all those other things. Didn't matter whether they won any games. They don't care about that. They're just there. The games are to be able to go do other things. So each frame has a different emphasis. Now in the next discussion we're going to have, it'll be our last one for this. We're going to look at the 4 frames and I'm going to give you some ideas that you sketch in just so you can remember later on. Okay? We'll be right back.